Leopold II served as King of the Belgians from 1865 until his death in 1909, making him the longest-reigning monarch in Belgian history. He was born in Brussels as the second child, but eldest surviving son of King Leopold I and Queen Louise, and ascended the throne following his father's death. Leopold ruled Belgium for 44 years, leaving no surviving legitimate male heirs. The present Belgian monarch, King Philippe, descends instead from Leopold's nephew and successor, Albert I. Within Belgium, Leopold II became widely known as the Builder King, a title reflecting the extensive public works, monuments, and urban development projects he commissioned during his reign. However, his historical legacy is inseparable from his role in Central Africa, where he established one of the most brutal colonial regimes of the modern era. In 1885, Leopold became the founder and sole proprietor of the Congo Free State, a vast territory corresponding largely to the modern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Unlike other European colonies, the Congo Free State was not owned by Belgium as a nation, but functioned as Leopold's personal possession, governed through a personal union with the Belgian crown. To secure control over the region, Leopold employed the explorer Henry Morton Stanley, who negotiated treaties, often through coercion or deception, with local leaders to legitimize Leopold's claims. At the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, European colonial powers formally recognized Leopold's authority over the Congo Basin. Although Leopold publicly portrayed his project as a humanitarian and anti-slavery mission, his administration quickly revealed its true purpose: the extraction of wealth for personal gain. Leopold himself never visited the Congo, instead ruling from Europe through an armed colonial force known as the Force Publique, composed of European officers and African soldiers. Initially, Leopold profited from the large-scale extraction of ivory, but during the 1890s, the rapid rise in global demand for rubber transformed the Congo into a forced labor economy. Indigenous Congolese communities were compelled to meet strict rubber production quotas, enforced through terror and violence. Leopold's rule was marked by systematic brutality, including forced labor, torture, murder, kidnapping, village destruction, and the widespread amputation of hands inflicted on men, women, and children as punishment for failing to meet production demands or as proof of killings by colonial troops. In 1890, African-American historian and activist George Washington Williams became one of the first to publicly condemn Leopold's regime, describing its practices as crimes against humanity, one of the earliest recorded uses of the term. Despite growing international criticism, Leopold denied responsibility and continued to profit from Congo resources for years. Estimating the human cost of Leopold's rule remains difficult due to limited population records, but scholars generally agree that the Congo experienced a catastrophic population decline during this period. Estimates range from 1 million to as many as 15 million deaths. The causes included epidemic disease, starvation, violent repression, forced displacement, and a sharp decline in birth rates brought on by the trauma and disruption of Congolese society. Leopold II's administration in the Congo Free State became internationally notorious for its extreme exploitation, systemic violence, and widespread human rights abuses, particularly linked to the rubber trade. His rule stands today as one of the most devastating examples of colonial exploitation in world history. Leopold II was born in Brussels on April 9, 1835, into the Belgian royal family. He was the second child of King Leopold I, the first king of the Belgians, and Queen Louise, the daughter of King Louis Philippe of France. Although not the firstborn, Leopold became heir to the throne after the death of his elder brother, Louis Philippe, Crown Prince of Belgium, who died in infancy in 1834. In recognition of his status as heir apparent, Leopold was granted the title Duke of Brabant in 1840. Leopold's early life was shaped by political upheaval and personal loss. The French Revolution of 1848 forced his maternal grandfather, King Louis Philippe, to abdicate and flee into exile in the United Kingdom. 2 years later, in 1850, Louis Philippe died. This loss deeply affected Leopold's mother, whose health was already fragile. That same year, she succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving Leopold orphaned at the age of 15. Leopold was closely connected to many of Europe's ruling families. His sister, Princess Charlotte of Belgium, later known as Empress Carlotta of Mexico, married Archduke Maximilian of Austria and became empress in 1864. Leopold was also closely related to the British royal family. Queen Victoria was his first cousin, as was her husband, Prince Albert. These relationships stemmed from shared ancestry within the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, linking the Belgian, British, and German royal lines. In his early adulthood, Leopold pursued a military career within Belgium, rising through the ranks to become a lieutenant general. Alongside his military service, he also took part in national politics, serving as a member of the Belgian Senate. These experiences helped shape his political outlook and prepared him for his eventual ascension to the Belgian throne. Leopold married Marie Henriette of Austria in 1853 at age 18. Though initially popular and admired for her energy, beauty, and artistic talents, the marriage became unhappy. They had 4 children, but their only son died at age 9, a loss that deeply affected Leopold. After failing to produce another male heir, the couple separated. Marie Henriette withdrew from public life and died in 1902. In later life, Leopold took multiple mistresses, most notably Caroline Lacroix, a 16-year-old French prostitute whom he met in 1899. He showered her with wealth, estates, and a noble title, which damaged his public reputation in Belgium more than his actions in the Congo. Lacroix bore him 2 sons, and public outrage intensified after their second child was born with a deformed hand, prompting satirical attacks linking Leopold to Congo atrocities. Leopold married Lacroix in a secret religious ceremony shortly before his death, though the union was legally invalid. After his death, it was revealed that he had left her a large fortune derived from Congo holdings, much of which the Belgian state and his daughters later reclaimed. Leopold ascended to the Belgian throne in 1865, and from the outset he defined his ambitions clearly. In an 1888 letter to his brother, Prince Philippe, Count of Flanders, he wrote that Belgium must become strong and prosperous, arguing that such strength required overseas colonies that would be peaceful and admirable. This belief would later shape many of his most consequential actions as king. His reign coincided with significant political transformation within Belgium. From 1857 to 1880, the Liberal Party dominated government, culminating in the Frere-Orban Law of 1879, which established state-funded, compulsory, secular primary education and removed public funding from Catholic schools. This provoked a strong reaction. In 1880, the Catholic Party won parliamentary control, and by 1884 restored state support for religious education. Meanwhile, the growth of socialist and social democratic movements led to the founding of the Labour Party in 1885, reflecting rising worker unrest and demands for political reform. Mounting pressure from these movements ultimately resulted in the introduction of universal male suffrage in 1893, although its impact was limited by a system of weighted or plural voting. Leopold's reign also saw important social legislation. Workers were granted the right to organize labor unions, and the livret d'ouvrier, an internal passport that tracked workers' employment histories, was abolished. New laws restricted child labor, banning factory work for children under 12, night work for those under 16, and underground labor for women under 21. Additional reforms ensured compensation for workplace injuries and established Sunday as a guaranteed day of rest. Despite these reforms, Leopold struggled with Belgium's linguistic divide. His reluctance to speak Dutch in public alienated the Flemish population and worsened tensions with the Flemish movement, making him less popular than his father. However, his nephew and designated heir, Prince Baudouin, gained strong support among Flemings. After Baudouin's untimely death in 1891, Leopold made limited efforts to address the divide by delivering speeches in Dutch. A major constitutional reform took place in 1893, introducing universal male suffrage, reducing property requirements for Senate eligibility, and establishing proportional representation, a system still used in Belgium today. Leopold strongly advocated for the introduction of a royal referendum, which would allow the king to directly consult voters and use the outcome to justify a veto of parliamentary decisions. The proposal was rejected, as it would have undermined parliamentary authority. Deeply disappointed, Leopold briefly considered abdicating the throne. National defense was another priority of his reign. Leopold viewed military strength as essential to maintaining Belgian neutrality and worked to fortify the country against invasion. Under his direction, major defensive fortresses were constructed at Liège, Namur, and Antwerp. During the Franco-Prussian War, he successfully preserved Belgium's neutrality despite intense pressure. He also pushed for reforms to the military service system, which at the time allowed men to avoid conscription by hiring substitutes. Though he failed to secure reform for most of his reign, the system was eventually replaced near the end of his life with compulsory service requiring one son from each family to serve. According to historian Jan Stengers, Leopold II's imperial ambitions were driven less by personal glory than by economic calculation. His approach to empire prioritized efficiency, profit, and direct financial returns, often through harsh systems of exploitation and forced labor. Yet Stengers also notes that Leopold's motives were not purely self-serving. They were closely tied to a nationalist desire to increase Belgium's wealth, power, and international standing. On November 15, 1902, an assassination attempt was made on King Leopold II by Gennaro Rubino, an Italian anarchist. The attack occurred as Leopold traveled in a ceremonial procession from a memorial service at the Church of St. Michael in St. Gudula, today known as Brussels Cathedral, held in honor of his recently deceased wife, Queen Marie Henriette. As the royal carriage moved past, Rubino fired 3 gunshots into the cortege. Although Leopold emerged unharmed, the attack nearly proved fatal for his Grand Marshal, Count Charles John d'Outremont, who narrowly escaped death. Rubino was seized at the scene, taken into custody immediately, and later sentenced to life imprisonment. He remained incarcerated until his death in 1918. News of the king's survival prompted widespread public relief and celebration across Belgium. That same evening, before a performance of Tristan und Isolde at the Royal Theatre of La Monnie, the orchestra played the Belgian national anthem, the Brabançon. The audience joined in singing, and the moment concluded with prolonged applause and cheers. Messages of support and congratulations poured in from foreign leaders and the Pope, praising Leopold for surviving the attempt on his life. Leopold himself responded with characteristic fatalism. When speaking to a senator after the incident, he reportedly remarked, "Mon cher sénateur, si la fatalité veut que je sois atteint, tant pis. My dear senator, if fate intends for me to be shot, so be it." Before European colonization, the region now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo was a vast and ecologically diverse land of rainforests, savannas, rivers, and mineral-rich areas, with the Congo River serving as a major hub for trade and communication. The Congo was not a single state, but a mosaic of kingdoms, chiefdoms, and kin-based communities, such as the Kingdom of Congo in the west and the Luba and Lunda kingdoms in the southeast, alongside smaller villages. Societies had sophisticated political structures, maintained social cohesion through kinship and customary law, and practiced rich cultural traditions, including oral history, music, art, and rituals. Economically, pre-colonial Congo relied on subsistence agriculture, hunting, fishing, and regional trade of copper, ivory, palm oil, and textiles. Communities operated largely on communal norms, with labor shared and surplus goods used for trade rather than profit extraction. Religious life centered on animism, ancestor worship, and nature spirits, while art, music, and dance were integral to cultural and social life. The population, estimated in the tens of millions, was concentrated along rivers and fertile areas, but spread across forests and savannas, forming complex networks of societies.
So before European colonization, the peoples of the Congo lived within complex, stable societies shaped by harmony, tradition, and collective responsibility. The region was not a single nation but a vast mosaic of cultures, languages, and political systems that had developed organically over centuries. Kingdoms such as Congo, Luba, and Lunda governed large territories, while countless smaller communities organized village life through kinship, lineage, and shared customs. Authority was typically exercised through councils of elders and chiefs who ruled by consensus, guided by tradition rather than brute force. Leadership carried moral obligations to protect the people, maintain balance, and ensure justice. Daily life in the Congo was closely intertwined with the natural environment. The Congo River and its tributaries served as lifelines, connecting communities and enabling trade, communication, and cultural exchange. People practiced subsistence farming, growing crops such as cassava, yams, bananas, and plantains, while fishing and hunting supplemented diets with protein. Labor was communal, fields were planted and harvested together, homes were built collectively, and food was shared during times of abundance and scarcity alike. This system fostered cooperation and minimized extreme poverty. Trade networks flourished long before European arrival. Copper, iron tools, salt, palm oil, ivory, and finely woven raffia textiles were exchanged across regions. Markets were social spaces as much as economic ones, strengthening ties between communities and reinforcing mutual dependence. Craftsmanship was highly valued. Artisans created tools, pottery, musical instruments, masks, and sculptures that reflected both skill and spiritual meaning. Culture formed the heart of Congolese life. Music, dance, and oral storytelling preserved history, moral values, and ancestral knowledge. Songs and rhythms accompanied work, celebrations, rituals, and healing ceremonies. Spiritual beliefs emphasized respect for ancestors and nature, viewing the living, the dead, and the unborn as interconnected. These beliefs encouraged social harmony, accountability, and reverence for life. Conflict, when it arose, was usually addressed through mediation, compensation, and ritual reconciliation, rather than widespread violence. Social order depended on restoring balance, not domination. Families and clans provided security, identity, and belonging, ensuring that individuals were rarely isolated or abandoned. While life was not without hardship, disease, environmental challenges, and occasional warfare existed, Congolese societies were self-sustaining, culturally rich, and socially cohesive. People lived with a deep sense of connection to their land, their ancestors, and one another. This way of life, grounded in cooperation and tradition, would later be profoundly disrupted by colonial rule, but its legacy endures in Congolese culture, memory, and resilience.
Leopold II established the Congo Free State as a unique colonial enterprise. It was not a Belgian colony, but his personal possession, created and operated entirely for his own benefit. To secure control over the vast Congo basin, today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Leopold relied heavily on the explorer Henry Morton Stanley, whose expeditions helped formalize territorial claims. At the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, European powers officially recognized Leopold's authority over the region on the condition that he would promote humanitarian progress and improve the welfare of its inhabitants. In reality, the Congo Free State was administered from Brussels, and nearly all positions of authority within the territory were held by Belgians. This included civil administrators, judges, military officers, and missionaries. The army, known as the Force Publique, was led by Belgian officers and functioned as the primary instrument of control. Even religious institutions, particularly Catholic missions, operated under strong Belgian influence and often worked alongside the colonial administration. Leopold amassed enormous wealth from the Congo's natural resources. At first, profits came mainly from ivory, but during the 1890s, the global demand for rubber soared, transforming rubber extraction into the colony's primary source of income. Indigenous communities were forced to harvest rubber under brutal conditions, with the force publique enforcing production quotas through terror and violence. Failure to meet these quotas frequently resulted in execution. Soldiers were ordered to present the severed hands of those they killed as proof that ammunition had been used for enforcement rather than hunting, a practice that led to widespread mutilation and the grotesque use of amputated hands as substitutes for rubber quotas. Following the Brussels Anti-Slavery Conference of 1889 to 1890, Leopold introduced new decrees that further tightened his grip on the Congolese population. Africans were required to sell key products, primarily ivory and rubber, exclusively to the state. This policy built upon earlier laws declaring all unoccupied land to be state property. As a result, resources taken from these lands automatically belonged to the government, effectively establishing a state monopoly. The Free State could dictate prices, leaving Congolese workers with little or no compensation for their labor. While devastating for most of the population, the system benefited certain local elites, who were armed by the colonial authorities and tasked with collecting goods and enforcing compliance within their communities. The human cost of this regime was catastrophic. Millions of Congolese, including women and children, were subjected to killing, mutilation, starvation, forced labor, and disease. Entire communities were destroyed, and birth rates declined sharply. Estimates of population loss during Leopold's rule vary widely, from 1 million to as many as 15 million, with many scholars converging around a figure of approximately 10 million deaths. Other historians caution that exact numbers are difficult to determine due to the lack of reliable census data, the impact of epidemics such as smallpox and sleeping sickness, and the limited number of colonial agents overseeing vast territories. As evidence of atrocities accumulated, missionaries, journalists, diplomats, and human rights activists exposed the reality of life in the Congo Free State. These revelations sparked an international outcry in the early 20th century. Under mounting pressure, Leopold was ultimately compelled to surrender control of the Congo in 1908, transferring it to the Belgian state and bringing an end, at least formally, to his personal rule over the territory. Leopold II was convinced that overseas colonies were essential to a nation's prestige and power, and he devoted immense energy to acquiring colonial territories for Belgium. He imagined our little Belgium as the center of a vast overseas empire. Determined to act, Leopold pursued colonial ventures, not as a state project, but as a private citizen, even receiving financial support from the Belgian government to fund his ambitions. During this period, Leopold observed the empires of the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain as waning powers and explored the possibility of purchasing their territories. In 1866, he instructed the Belgian ambassador in Madrid to negotiate with Queen Isabella II of Spain over the potential cession of the Philippines to Belgium. When the ambassador failed to act, Leopold replaced him with a more compliant diplomat to pursue the plan. After Isabella II was deposed in 1868, Leopold attempted once more to acquire the Philippines, and later devised a plan to make it an independent state under Belgian influence. But both schemes ultimately failed. Frustrated, he turned his attention to Africa as the new focus for colonization. By 1876, after several unsuccessful attempts to secure overseas territories in both Asia and Africa, Leopold established a private holding company disguised as a philanthropic and scientific organization. He named it the International African Society, formerly the International Association for the Exploration and Civilization of the Congo. Through this organization, Leopold could present himself as a humanitarian while advancing his personal colonial ambitions. In 1878, the society hired the explorer Henry Morton Stanley to travel through Central Africa, establish treaties with local leaders, and lay the groundwork for a colony in the Congo region. Through extensive diplomatic maneuvering and lobbying among European powers, Leopold secured recognition at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, attended by representatives of 14 European countries and the United States. The conference formally acknowledged Leopold as the sovereign ruler over most of the territory claimed by him and Stanley. On February 5, 1885, the Congo Free State was officially created. Covering an area 76 times larger than Belgium, it was entirely under Leopold's personal control and administered through his private army, the Force Publique, which enforced his rule throughout the territory. Leopold II amassed enormous personal wealth by exploiting the natural resources of the Congo Free State. Initially, the colony exported ivory, but profits were far lower than expected. When global demand for rubber surged in the late 19th century, the administration shifted its focus to the labor-intensive collection of rubber sap. In abandoning the humanitarian promises made at the Berlin Conference, Leopold's government restricted foreign access to the territory and imposed forced labor on the local population. The methods of enforcement were extremely brutal. Workers were beaten, subjected to widespread killings, and frequently mutilated when rubber quotas were not met. Families were held hostage, with wives and children taken to ensure compliance. Missionaries and observers documented the horrors of these policies. One, John Harris of Baringa, wrote to Leopold's chief agent after visiting the village of Insongomboyo, "The abject misery and utter abandon is positively indescribable. I was so moved by the people's stories that I took the liberty of promising them that in future you will only kill them for crimes they commit." The death toll of Leopold's regime is staggering, though exact numbers remain uncertain. Estimates range from 1 million to 15 million deaths. Early population figures were unreliable, and critics like E.D. Morel acknowledged the difficulty of precise calculation. Modern historical research, including work by Adam Hochschild and anthropologist Jan van Sina, suggests that roughly half of the Congo's population perished during Leopold's rule. The 1919 Belgian government commission and later censuses indicate a population decline of approximately 10 million people. Epidemics compounded the human tragedy. Smallpox and sleeping sickness, African trypanosomiasis, devastated communities already weakened by forced labor and famine. By 1896, the disease had killed up to 5,000 people in the village of Lukalela along the Congo River. British consul Roger Casement later documented only 600 survivors there by 1903, highlighting the scale of the epidemic. The long-term effects of Leopold's policies extended far beyond immediate deaths. Economists Sarah Lowe's and Eduardo Montero found that communities subjected to intensive rubber exploitation suffered persistent economic setbacks. Traditional economic systems were disrupted, human capital was lost, and local governance was weakened by the colonial co-option of chiefs. Their research links these historical abuses to ongoing political and economic underdevelopment in the region, showing how the legacy of Leopold's personal rule continues to shape the Democratic Republic of the Congo today. International criticism of Leopold II's rule in the Congo. Free State grew in the early 20th century, fueled by literary works and eyewitness accounts. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, 1899 to 1902, inspired by his own experiences as a steamer captain on the Congo 12 years earlier, portrayed the colony's exploitation and human suffering, drawing global attention to the abuses there. In response to mounting concern, the British Crown appointed Roger Casement as consul to investigate conditions in the Congo. Casement conducted extensive travel and interviews throughout the region, ultimately producing the Casement Report, which documented widespread atrocities, forced labor, and systemic abuse under Leopold's administration. The revelations sparked a public outcry, particularly in Britain. E.D. Morel, a former shipping clerk, worked with Casement to establish the Congo Reform Association, the first large-scale human rights campaign aimed at ending Leopold's exploitation. The movement drew support from prominent figures abroad, including American writer Mark Twain, whose satirical pamphlet King Leopold's Soliloquy lampooned the king, using Leopold's own words to highlight the disconnect between his professed Christian mission and the reality of starvation and violence in the Congo. Other writers joined the critique. Arthur Conan Doyle, in The Crime of the Congo, 1908, compared Leopold's rubber regime to British colonial administration in Nigeria, arguing that rulers of so-called primitive peoples should prioritize their well-being over personal profit. Historian Adam Hochschild, in King Leopold's Ghost, notes that many of Leopold's policies, including forced labor and colonial monopolies, were influenced by Dutch practices in the East Indies, and that similar coercive methods were also employed to varying degrees by Germany, France, and Portugal in their own colonies where rubber was produced. Leopold also attempted to counter criticism through propaganda. In 1891, under the direction of his British consul, Sir Alfred Lewis Jones, the king sponsored American author May French Sheldon on a controlled expedition through the Congo Free State. Traveling exclusively on state and company-owned steamboats, Sheldon's itinerary and experiences were carefully managed to prevent exposure to the atrocities. Upon her return to England, she published articles claiming, "I have witnessed more atrocities in London streets than I have ever seen in the Congo." Leopold subsequently paid her a monthly stipend to lobby members of parliament and influence public perception in his favor. Through literature, journalism, and activist networks, Leopold's abuses in the Congo were exposed, sparking one of the first major international human rights campaigns in modern history. Leopold II died on December 17, 1909 at Laeken from an embolism. ending his 44-year reign, the longest in Belgian history. His funeral was met with public disapproval as crowds booed the cortege. He was buried in the royal vault at the Church of Our Lady of Laeken. Although attention to the Congo atrocities waned after his death, cultural works like Vachel Lindsay's poem, The Congo, kept the memory alive, condemning his brutal treatment of the Congolese. Statues of Leopold were erected in the 1930s, and the Belgian government celebrated his achievements domestically, largely overlooking his violent colonial legacy. Debate over his actions resurfaced with Adam Hochschild's 1999 book, King Leopold's Ghost, which detailed his acquisition of the Congo, exploitation, and the resulting massive death toll. Discussions have continued into the 21st century, including controversial defenses of Leopold, such as Louis Michel calling him a visionary hero in 2010, which was widely contested by politicians who described his actions as shameful and likened them to crimes under modern standards. Leopold's legacy came under renewed scrutiny in 2020, following Black Lives Matter protests in Brussels. The Belgian parliament initiated a commission to examine the country's colonial past, and King Philippe issued a statement expressing regret for the violence and cruelty committed in the Congo, though he did not explicitly mention Leopold. Critics argued the apology was incomplete. Leopold II remains a highly controversial figure, both in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Belgium. In Kinshasa, a statue of him was briefly reinstated in 2005 by Culture Minister Christophe Muzungu, citing some economic and social progress under his rule, but it was removed hours later due to public opposition. In Belgium, many statues of Leopold were erected during the interwar period as part of colonial patriotic propaganda, aiming to rehabilitate his image after the international outcry over Congo Free State atrocities. These monuments have since become focal points for debate, with proposals for removal gaining momentum, particularly during the George Floyd protests in 2020, when several statues were vandalized and petitions circulated both for and against their removal. In response, the Brussels Parliament called for a committee to decolonize the public sphere, and Belgian authorities began removing statues of Leopold, starting in June 2020, with locations in Ekeren, Antwerp, and the University of Mons. The legacy of Leopold II's rule over the Congo Free State remains a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked power and colonial greed. Millions of Congolese lives were lost, families torn apart, and communities scarred by forced labor, violence, and systematic exploitation. While Leopold amassed immense wealth and shaped Belgium's urban landscape, the human cost of his ambitions is a dark chapter that cannot be overlooked. Today, the Congo continues to grapple with the long-lasting social, economic, and psychological effects of this period, and the story of Leopold II serves as a cautionary tale. That imperial ambition, when pursued without accountability, leaves indelible marks on generations. Remembering this history is not just about acknowledging past atrocities. It is about ensuring that such exploitation and disregard for human life are never repeated.